Hi, this is Ed Talks Television. Let's talk about today's episode of Beyond the Gates. It's Friday, July 31st. Let's jump into it. There were a few conversations in Fairmont Crest about Haley, Sammy, and Bill. And I think now that Catlock is on the case, we're coming to the climax of the Kill Bill story sooner rather than later. So we're going to start off back at the country club where we left off yesterday with Kat, Danny, Naomi, and Chelsea. Now, remember, when we left off yesterday, Danny had just been told by Kat that Haley had thrown Chelsea and Naomi out of their house while Bill stood there. Danny lost her mind. She was ready to go over there and give them hell. Chelsea and Naomi, of course, tried to talk their mother down and tell her it wasn't a good idea for her to go over there. Danny laid out her case as to why it was a good idea for her to go over there to defend her daughters and tell Bill and Haley that they can't treat them like that. And she said, "Hey, Kat, back me up." Kat, in another moment of self-awareness, now I talk about this a lot, that Kat is one of just a handful of characters on this show who has some good self-awareness. She, in that moment, whether she agreed with Danny or not, I believe she probably did, because it would be in Kat's nature to hightail it over to Bill's house and cuss him out as well. But she recognized in that moment that there were two warring factions. You had Danny, who wanted to set fire to Bill and Haley's house, and you had Naomi and Chelsea, who were trying to keep the calm, keep the peace, if you will. And regardless of what Kat thought, she decided it would be better if she just removed herself from the situation. So she had a line of dialogue that said something like, "I think this is an issue for the Hamiltons to settle." That's not the exact line, but that's the gist of it. And in that moment, I thought, wow, Kat's really self-aware. She understood that she was in a no-win situation. If she agreed with her Aunt Danny, Naomi and Chelsea would look at her and say, "We were trying to de-escalate this situation, and now you've encouraged our mother to go over there and start World War III with our father and Haley." If she had agreed with Chelsea and Naomi, Danny wouldn't have necessarily been upset, but I think she would have just thought, why, people, why is nobody got common sense like I do and want to fight the good fight? She wouldn't have been mad at Kat, but Kat understood that this was a situation where it would be best for her to just stay out of it. And I was thinking, wow, very few people give Kat that sort of grace. When she's ranting, usually about Eva, they always offer up their own opinion as to what she should do. Now, Kat, like I said, is very self-aware. She will ask questions. She will say, she asks questions of herself and of other people about herself. Am I selfish? Am I mean? Am I spoiled? Am I a brat? But when she's raging about Eva, people's first inclination is to offer her their opinion and their advice as to how she should behave. And instead of saying, you know what, you're entitled to your feelings, I'm just going to let you rage and rant and get it all out and vent and get it all out. And after you've gotten all out, maybe you will feel better and have a bit more clarity and understanding of how you want to proceed in this particular situation that you're in with Eva now. But they don't do that. And so that's why I like to say that Kat has a lot more self-awareness, because she tends to ask the questions of herself. She goes to others for counsel, but in moments where, and I'm not saying she's perfect and she always does this, but today was a good example of where she understood the assignment. She understood that getting involved in this family dynamic was not for the best. And so I just wanted to call that out because I thought it was a really smart character moment for Kat. So Danny hightails it out of the country club to go over to Bill's. And side note, the dress that they had Danny in was spectacular. I loved it. How Beyond the Gates was not nominated for Best Costume Design is, and it's absurd. It's a slap in the face. They got 15 Daytime Emmy nominations. Costume design should have been number 16. It is crazy. It's crazy. But anyway, before Danny can get over to Bill and Haley's, we ended yesterday's episode with Bill saying, we need to talk about how you treated my daughters because that wasn't okay. And so Haley's saying she's tired of the disrespect, and Bill saying you had no right to talk to my daughters that way. You had no right to kick them out of the house. Haley says, "Oh, it's your house," and his name. I think his name is probably the only one on the deed. He pays all the bills. Listen, I'm not saying that they're not full partners and that it's not Haley's house, but Haley knows. With any other character, I wouldn't go there, but Haley knows. But but what was great about this scene and this dynamic was that Bill was firm with Haley, but he was really trying to be the peacemaker. He just wants everybody to get along. It's this kind of naivete that Bill has carried with him since the beginning of the show that, he left his wife and family for his daughter's best friend, and he expects that everything should just be kosher between everyone. And that's just not the way it is. That's not the way Chelsea and Naomi want it. That's definitely not the way Danny wants it. Now, I will say that the heat that Chelsea and Naomi have had for Haley over the past few weeks is the heat that should have been more sustained through year one of this show. There were moments, and understandably, there were moments like during the fake pregnancy, the fake miscarriage, and the fake mugging, where we saw Naomi and Chelsea have empathy for Haley because they're nice people, they're kind people, and obviously they don't know that all of this stuff is fake. But even before those instances, we could see, especially with Naomi, a softening towards Haley, where I think it was like, well, we used to be friends, and Naomi's a complicated case. And so I just thought that the heat that we've seen between those three characters in particular should have been the heat that we saw in year one. I'm Monday morning quarterbacking, of course, because year one is come and gone. But even with Haley, this is my house. I'm the lady of the house. Like, she really should have had that energy in year one, more of that energy in year one. I think it would have made her a much more interesting character up until the point we found out that she was a con woman. Because part of the issue with the Haley character has been that there has been a bit of an inconsistency in the writing for her. In the beginning, we thought she was going to be this bad girl gold digger. And quite frankly, she just kind of sat around for the first half of the year. She could barely get a meal at the country club until Danny allowed her to and told the waiter that she could eat. She spent a lot of time begging for Danny and Naomi's forgiveness and wanting to be a part of, that inner circle again. When Chelsea was kidnapped, she hightailed it over to the Dupree mansion and wanted to be a part of that situation when she was not welcome. And that's why I always say that I really do believe that Haley becoming a con artist was a rewrite in order to save the character, in order to make the character more interesting, because at some point, and I think because it might have been because Leslie and Eva became more popular than maybe expected, so they started writing for those two characters more, that Haley kind of got left in the background, and they had to figure out how to salvage the character. And so we got Haley the con artist, which in many ways was one of the more entertaining stories on the show. It's just that the pacing has been not great. So But I do think that, because remember, we saw a lot of Haley being jealous of Danny, that doesn't track with Haley the con woman. Now, understanding that Haley has to keep up a front in front of Bill, like today, I'm the woman of the house. This is my house. I, am trying to help you with your health, and we agreed on these things, and you told them to leave too. All the things, because she still, even though she wants him dead, she still has to convince him or keep him convinced that she's desperately in love with him. But remember, there were times where, she would see Bill's car in Danny's driveway and lose her mind. There was a point where she thought Bill was in Danny's house, and she went over there and she was screaming for Bill. Where are you? Come downstairs. She was looking under pillows on the sofa. And it was like, that big man is not under the sofa. She was looking in the cabinets. It was insane. She was unhinged. And there was no reason for Haley to put on a performance like that for Danny if she was conning, if it was all an art of the con. But, rewriting some stories is common in daytime soap. So I'm not mad at it, but I'm just pointing out some things that didn't track. And so even today, while I knew that Haley was putting on a performance for Bill, there are times when the dialogue that they give to the character it's a little confusing for me. I think it's a little confusing to the viewer, where you start to question, does she really want to kill Bill, or is she in love with him? It's, and you go to it's a performance part of it because we know that she's a con woman, but I do think there is a little bit of an issue in the writing when it comes to Haley and fully figuring out who she is. Now, the one thing I do like is that she is, in scenes with Randy, and when she has that beautiful little smirk on her face every time she's poisoning Bill, she is unapologetic about what she's doing. There is no sob. We're not getting any sob story about how she grew up poor and in poverty, and this is what she deserves. And we don't get kind of the same type of language and dialogue that we get from Leslie, where she tries to justify her actions because, now listen, there's a whole other thing about Leslie and what Ted did to her, and not justifying her trying to kill Laura, but there is a whole conversation to be had about how Leslie can over the course of 26 years slowly became this woman who would try to take out a young girl and publicly break up a marriage. But even the other day, when she was talking to Vanessa, she brings up the old, the respect I deserve. I've been fighting for, all my life for this, that, and the other thing. Haley doesn't do that. Haley just wants the money. She is unapologetic at the fact that she's been conning all these men over the course of years only for the money. And that I do appreciate about that character. So she and Bill, have this argument, have this fight. They come to a compromise where she says, well, how about this? How about you tell the girls to text or call before they come over, and I'll make myself scarce. And Bill says, okay, I'll try that. But they're still not in a great place, and Haley storms out. Now, meanwhile, while Bill and Haley are fighting, Randy is over at Uptown sending V a text. So remember, Haley's real name is Val, and he has her stored in his phone as V, and he wanted her to come over to Uptown. So assuming after she stormed out, she saw the text and she hightailed it over to Uptown. Now, in the meantime, Naomi, Chelsea, and Kat head over to Naomi's apartment because they're having a new generator installed. No, I'm sorry, it's a home. I'm not sure if it's a house or a condo, but to their home. The tornado freaked Jacob out, so he's having a new generator put in just in case. So they're there, and they're talking about, the Danny Bill Haley situation, and how maybe it is a good thing that Danny's going over there because maybe she can get through to Bill about his health. Now, Kat is like, okay, great. that would be a good thing, but we need to circle back to what's important. Why is this guy who you know as Sammy also using the name Randy? Because to me, that's fishy, and it sounds like he's trying to cover something up. Kat is on the case. Our catlock is on it. And so she says to Chelsea, what did he look like? And Chelsea's, he was brown skinned, he was good looking, he was muscular, he was closer to my dad's age than Haley's, which is a good note because remember, Doug and Randy grew up together. Doug and Bill are probably in their mid to late 50s, lawyer, doctor. Now, I don't think Randy looks like he's in his mid to late 50s. I would say he's probably, like, at the most, he looks like he's in his mid 40s. But again, when you think about the fact that Doug went to medical school and was a cardiac surgeon, Bill went to law school, he's this high-powered attorney. Those jobs are going to wear on you a little bit and age you a little bit. Not saying that either man looks like super old, but they look their age. They look like they're in their 50s, whereas I don't think Randy does. But Beyond the Gates also has like this wonky way of casting where age just kind of like if you get mired down in how old and people are supposed to be based on what they look like, you'll go down a complete rabbit hole. So, of course, Naomi doesn't know anything because she's never met Randy, so she's unable to really contribute to the conversation. While Chelsea was describing Randy, Sammy to Kat pulls out her tablet, and for a moment I thought Kat was going to start doing a sketch of Randy based off of Chelsea's description. And I actually howled because I thought, well, why should Chelsea be the only, artistic person in this family? Of course Catlock can do sketches of suspects. But that's not what she was doing. She was, taking more notes. She had to then excuse herself because she had a meeting. She had to meet Deanna down at Uptown, which we'll get to, which plays a pivotal part in today's episode, story-wise. Meanwhile, Danny gets over to Bill. She storms in. She's looking for Haley. He tells her Haley's not there. She throws her bag down and rails into Bill about the whole kicking the daughters out of the house. Bill remains seated for most of those scenes, which is a really interesting directing and acting choice, because we know when Haley stormed out, Bill's hand was shaking and he was trying to control it with his other hand. So in those scenes with Danny, Timon, the actor who plays Bill, was making a choice to sit and remain still and calm as possible with Danny, and using the calmness as, I was just trying to de-escalate this situation. And we also know that Bill is kind of turned on by Danny when she's fired up like this. And, but for the audience, Timon was conveying that there is still something wrong with Bill. Bill is not feeling well. I could see it in his breathing, but he was controlling it enough that Danny couldn't tell something was wrong with Bill. Ultimately, they get to a place where she understands that they've come to, Haley and Bill have come to a compromise that he's going to talk to the girls about it. Then she starts asking about his health and wants him to take it seriously. It was a good scene. It's kind of how the scenes with Bill and Danny go, as far as them having like this explosive top of the scene, top of the conversation, and then it mellows out because they have this chemistry and attraction to one another. Danny leaves. Bill calls Naomi. She tells him that she's at home. He goes over there and he talks to the girls where he makes his proposal of them calling and texting before they come over. Chelsea especially is not happy with this proposal, but ultimately the girls accept it and say they'll do it because, it's a compromise that they don't like, but they can live with. And Bill is just trying to play the peacemaker. Also interesting clue as to the fact that something probably is going to happen with Bill and his health that's going to be more dire than what we've seen is that they've been peppering in lines of dialogue that allude to Bill not being around, or I'm never going to leave you, I'm always going to be around, that is probably a precursor to him having a more catastrophic health event. Even Dani, before she left, said that there'll be no dying on her watch. So that, I think they're foreshadowing something bigger happening to Bill in the near future. Haley comes home. Haley meets with Randy. He's got more of the drugs for her. And she tells him that she's come up with like the right mixture, and that while she's telling Bill that she's got one of those aura rings on Bill, and she's telling him, Bill won't look at the numbers because he just doesn't want to, see that type of stuff. She's telling him that the numbers are going up, going in the right direction. But what we learn as we're listening in on Haley and Randy's conversation is that the numbers are actually going down in the wrong direction. And she feels like Bill could be a goner at any moment. And she tells Randy that she's convinced Bill to go to St. Bart's with her, where she expects Bill to die. And Randy says, well, that's a good thing because I've got a guy down there that can do a death certificate, he can cremate the body, and he can make sure there's no medical exam. So they've got it all, as long as they pay him. And he also tells Haley that she needs to make it right with Bill and the girls, because when Bill does die, it needs to look like she is the grieving widow, that it was unexpected, and that nobody has any suspicion that she has anything to do with Bill's bad health condition. So that's what Haley's intention was when she goes home. She finds a pair of sunglasses and immediately thinks that Bill had another woman in the house, but then it dawns on her that they are Dani's sunglasses. So she takes a picture of the sunglasses. She's very angry. And that's the other, that's kind of like the thing when I talk about the confusing writing for Haley. It's like she gets really angry where she ends up throwing the sunglasses across the room, and I could see an annoyance, oh, here she goes again. But then she ends up sending Dani a text of the sunglasses saying, "Not my style, stay out of my house." Dani is over at the country club because she assumed she left the sunglasses at the country club, so she's asking for lost and found, but they're obviously not there. And then she realizes that when she gets the text that they were at Bill's house, and the text from Haley actually amuses Dani because Dani likes to stir trouble. Over at the casino, Joey and Vanessa are talking about Heather. Heather is not a character I care about or want to learn more about, but Joey's talking about how she's not the sister that he remembers, and how we learn that, not only did Heather want to work for her father's criminal enterprise, she wanted to take it over, but he wouldn't allow it. She's now made a name for herself. She's the Impaler, but we don't want to hear that word anymore. And Vanessa doesn't know she's the Impaler. So Vanessa doesn't know exactly how she's made a name for herself. But Joey says now she's eyeing my business. And Vanessa tries to assuage his fears and say, she might be, maybe she's, that sister that is still, down there, deep down there. So, of course, as it does in that little casino room, it turns to sex, and they start kissing, and they're on the table. As that happens, Deanna walks into the doorway and sees it. She doesn't interrupt. She steps back out, and then she calls out, "Mom, are you around?" So that they have a moment to get themselves together. They get themselves together. Deanna's there because she has a meeting with Kat to deliver some papers, but the papers weren't at the office. Vanessa has them with her, so she's picking them up. Deanna, because she's got this plan and she's playing nice with Joey, asks Joey how his day is going. He says it's good. And then she says, "How's business?" He says, "Oh, really great. There are some high rollers here who are in over their head and they don't know when to quit." And that triggers Deanna. Now, Joey does this. This is purposeful dialogue. I always say, let villains villain. And Joey did this on purpose because he knows that Deanna is triggered by her father's gambling addiction, and that this is the place where the gambling addiction happened. So by saying, and when I think it was in yesterday's video, I talked about active dialogue, where it's specific, and it's because the person saying the dialogue wants a response for from the person they're delivering the dialogue to. And it's either a verbal response or some sort of action. In today's episode, the response was verbal. Deanna said, how could you say something? How does that make you happy, you heartless bastard? Well, of course, Vanessa, being the terrible mother that she is, takes Joey's side and says, how dare you talk to him like that? You need to apologize. Deanna remembers that she needs to stay on course for her plot and does ultimately apologize to Joey, and she takes the papers and leave. And then Vanessa laments that how could her daughter just, say things like that? She was raised better than that. And Joey, because he's a villain and he knows that he purposely triggered Deanna, plays the good guy. And he says, she apologized. It's all good. I'm not worried about it. Let villains villain. Joey accomplished two things in those scenes. One, he proved to himself that Deanna isn't all good with him and Vanessa's relationship. It was the thing that he knew to be true, but he needed to prove it. And that's why he had Randy keeping an eye on her. He also wanted to let Vanessa see that he's not going to let Deanna bother him, so that he continues to look good in Vanessa's eyes, while the shine on Deanna in Vanessa's eyes dims a little bit because Deanna's back to her old tricks. He is a villain. He is doing villain things. We like that in daytime drama. Joey then calls Randy after Vanessa leaves, and, Vanessa ends up meeting up with Danny at the country club, but nothing substantial happens there. Danny just fills Vanessa in on what was happening with Bill and the girls. But Joey calls Randy, who is at Orphe Jean's, and tells him that the mission with Deanna is off, because he now knows that Deanna is a emotional mess. And it's like, yeah, Joey, she is an emotional mess because of you. You helped get her father addicted to gambling, leveraged it to get her mother to launder money through her business, romance the mother, and then killed the father. Yes, she is an emotional mess because a villain villained. That's exactly what happened. So, but I like it when characters are active and not always passive. And I felt like the fangs had been taken out of Joey a bit as during the course of this romance with Vanessa. But as we've seen over the past few weeks, when he burned the letter he found in Doug's box that implicated Joey in a number of crimes, and he burned it in the fireplace, which of course he would, because why would he let Vanessa find that? And, and now what he purposely triggered and antagonized Deanna today, but in a way that goofy Vanessa couldn't see. Those are very active villain actions, and we like that sort of stuff. So Deanna sees Randy at Orphe Jean's, and she goes over and she talks to him and she tells him about, what happened with Joey. Now remember, Deanna doesn't know that Randy works for Joey. And so she doesn't realize that she's working with the enemy, so to speak. Kat walks in and she sees Deanna talking to this guy. And then as Deanna and Randy's conversation ends, they hug goodbye. So Kat and Deanna have lunch. Kat buys Deanna lunch, and Deanna gives Kat the envelope, which was some paperwork for her condo and a check because they didn't close when they were supposed to, so she's getting a refund on some taxes, blah, blah, blah. And then before Deanna leaves, Kat says, hey, I have a question for you. Who was that guy you were talking to? I saw you hug, but I don't recognize him. And Deanna says, oh, that's Randy. He is a friend of my dad's. They grew up together. And Kat hears the name Randy, and the light bulb goes off over her head. Now, Deanna leaves. The waitress asks Kat if she's ready to settle her bill, and Kat's like, no, I think I'm going to have a piece of cobbler. And then she moves closer over to Randy. Now, I was expecting Kat to pull out her phone and try to snap a pic of Randy, so that she could send it to Chelsea. And maybe that'll happen on Monday, so that Chelsea can verify that this is the guy that she knows as Sammy. But Kat is on the case. Our Catlock is on the case, and it's like, I would love for Kat to be a accessories mogul by day and a crime solver by night, because I love that Kat is now involved in this story. And the other thing that's great about Kat being involved in this story, it shows that Kat can stand alone in story without it having to do with Eva, because so much of Kat's story has been attached to Eva over the last year and a half that we haven't really gotten to see Kat a lot. Now, in year one, we did see Kat when she was partners with Jacob in trying to catch Leslie in the crimes against Laura. And we also saw her when she was partners with Jacob when Chelsea got kidnapped and solving Chelsea's kidnapping. So again, Kat should be used like Naomi is used. Naomi is used, she can be the center of her own story when it's about the BRCA gene, when it's about her relationship with Jacob, and they're doing their romance time. But they also use Naomi to orbit into other stories. The Ashley Derrick stuff, the June stuff, the grandparents, the Articulette stuff, when Anita was feeling down about music and Naomi organized everybody going to Uptown so they could sing. Naomi knows about what happened with Martin a year ago. So there are, so I think that this is a good situation for Kat as a character, because she's in a story that has nothing to do with Eva, has nothing to do with her parents, right? And she's also, it has nothing to do with Tomas. So Kat can exist as a character without a love interest. And I'm hoping that Kat does not return from Puerto Rico. Who knows? I'm assuming he is going to, because we haven't heard any casting news about him. But I think that showing that Kat can be interesting as a character outside of anything to do with Eva, and remember, she had a conversation with Martin yesterday when they had brunch together. Eva never came up. They were able to have a fun existence as brother and sister without having the topic of Eva. She was able to talk to Chelsea and Naomi yesterday and today without the topic of Eva coming up. So Kat can exist without Eva. Kat can exist without Tomas. Kat can exist without being tied into story that has to do with her parents. And I think this is a good example, and I'm hoping that the show moves forward with more of this as year 2 starts to wind down and we get into year 3. But today was a really good episode. I talked about in yesterday's video how the episode started off a little slow, and it was I thought it was just going to be one of those regular characters catching up with one another episodes. But in the second half, we started getting more into the Kill Bill story, and all these characters were coming together to exchange information that were leading us to a place. And that place today was Orphe Jeans, where Kat finds out who Randy is and what he looks like. And remember, she doesn't know that she knows Joey. She was at the casino when Chelsea got kidnapped and asked Joey for help. Randy wasn't there. I don't think Randy was back in town working for Joey at that point. So Kat doesn't realize that Randy works for Joey. Now, whether or not she gets a picture of him, we'll see. But we know that somebody who works for Kat's mother, Mona, knows Randy. So there are a lot of different avenues for Kat to find out more information about Randy. If she has a conversation with Mona, then Mona can give her the information that Randy works for Joey, which will be another connecting the dots in this story. But, they still have to figure out, and then it's okay, so how do Randy and Haley really know each other? That's the key piece. But I'm expecting that Kat will say at some point, how much do we really know about Haley before she came to Fairmont Crest? And that is going to be how Kat helps solve all of this. Kat is going to figure out how to, do some kind of background check on Haley. Just like when she looked up, remember, because she said it to Smitty at Uptown the other day on Wednesday, that Lynette got nervous when Kat told her that she looked her up online and couldn't find very much information. Well, what happens when Kat looks up Haley, whatever her last name was before she was Hamilton, online and can't find any information? It'll remind Kat, hey, this is just like what happened with Lynette. And Lynette and Haley were friends. So I'm really excited that we're getting more of the Kill Bill story. I hope the pacing continues for next week, and I'm looking forward to it. So thank you guys for joining me. You can catch recaps also on TikTok at Ed Talks TV. And, please like, share, and follow me if you're enjoying my Beyond the Gates recaps. I'll be back with some other, talking about some other television shows as I get this channel up and running. Take care and have a nice weekend.